Sunshine, patchy clouds on Friday, high 82. I'm Andy Robb on AM 560, The Answer.
57 at O'Hare, next news 7:30. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We talked about it the other week when it occurred. Talking about the protests that turned violent in Ferguson, Missouri, 10th anniversary of the burning down of Ferguson, Missouri, over the justified killing of Michael Brown. Not my opinion, the justice system's opinion in St. Louis. And, of course, at that when it turned ugly, the protest, you had an officer who suffered a traumatic brain injury after he was pushed to the ground by protesters.
He's still alive. He's had several brain surgeries, but he still remains in critical condition. And
the police chief there, Chief Doyle, had something to say on the topic.
This police department in 2014 had 3 African-American police officers. We have over 50% African-American police officers, 23% female representation on this police department. Like I mentioned before, maybe 4 officers from 2014 remain here at the Ferguson Police Department. This is a brand new police department. I don't know why the officers here, who wasn't even here in 2014, have to continue to suffer through this. It doesn't make any sense. This young officer, Travis Brown, got into this job because he was inspired to do the right thing. He wanted to be part of the change. He wanted to make an impact in our community. He's the type of officer that we want in our community. And what happens? He gets assaulted. I had to look his mother in the eye and tell her what happened to her son. I'm never going to do that again. I promise you that. I'm never going to do that again.
And yet, what do we hear from a certain segment of the political class about police? We hear it all the time from our mayor, BLM Brandon. What do we see on the streets of Chicago this week with the collection of leftist groups that have assembled to protest for everything under the sun? And it's starting to turn violent. It did yesterday. Thankfully, there's enough police presence that the worst instincts of those who have gathered in Chicago have been restrained. Police are doing a good job, which is interesting because they're doing a good job for a candidate for president
who wants to defund them?
Well, once upon a time, it was a conversation we wanted to have along with abolishing ICE, who also said, quote, I'm quoting, "It is outdated, wrong, and backward to think more police creates more safety." Well, I'll tell you what, been in Chicago for 5 decades, never seen more police on the streets of Chicago than we have for the DNC this year.
Not even NATO a few years back.
Not even close. So I guess the DNC is an exception to the Kamala rule about more police. For more on this, pleased to be joined by Gary McFadden. He is the sheriff of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, currently serving his 43rd year in law enforcement, and he's in town for the convention. Sheriff McFadden, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thank you all so much for having me.
What about what Chief Doyle there in Ferguson, Missouri, had to say the other week? I'm sure you saw and read about what happened. Maybe you know Chief Doyle. I don't know. But just sort of his exasperation with police doing what police are supposed to do, which is protect and serve in Ferguson, and yet they are treated to what happened the other week.
Well, these are the things that we wish that we can sit down with whoever becomes president and give them our priorities and mental health in our community and the mental health of our officers are very important. And as you said, this is my 43rd year in law enforcement. I worked for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department for 30 years, and then an additional 7 years part-time. And now I have been with the sheriff's office for my second term. So I clearly understand his frustration, and I clearly understand my fellow law enforcement officers' frustration. And this is why we're here in Chicago, because we just want to make sure whoever is president hear our priorities and our concern as law enforcement officers.
What about the rhetoric that you hear from big city mayors like our very own Brandon Johnson and many others, and not to mention the presidential candidate and the party that is convening in Chicago this week that was aligned with the defund the police movement just a few years ago?
Well, this is why it is so important to actually have a conversation with us and not about us. And that's why we're here. We want to have these conversations. We want to invite them, we don't want to be invited to their table, although we will take that, but we want them to we want to invite them to our table. Come to our facilities, come to our cities, and have these conversations. And we have to have conversations more than an hour. And that's why we think it's very important that we sit and have these conversations so you know where we're at.
Well, how do you begin the conversation? How do you start?
Well, here's what you said. Come in like anybody else. Let's talk. Invite us. We can talk about many, many, many things. We can talk about fentanyl. We can talk about the borders. We can talk about youth crime. We can talk about mental health. We can talk about these. So when you say, how do we start these conversations? Come together. It's not hard.
Well, but it's difficult if you don't have an honest broker on the other side of the table that you're speaking with. So they're this will not come as a shock to you. Oftentimes politicians will say one thing to someone's face and something very else when it's a different constituency and a different interest that has to be served. And the reality is that the Democratic Party, particularly in big cities, but really generally speaking, over the last 4 years since the summer of 2020, has taken, at minimum, a pretty hostile, rhetorical approach to law enforcement, and in many places, a pretty harsh and antagonistic policy approach to law enforcement.
Well, again, and let me make sure that we understand who I am. I am a elected Democratic sheriff, and I am a black sheriff. Mm-hmm. And so I clearly understand all of that. And again, what we need to do is don't talk about me, come and talk with me. And that's what we're asking them to do. And it's not going to settle in the first conversation. And this is why we're here. You know, I'm on the board of directors for the National Sheriff Association. That's every sheriff in America. That's 3,081 sheriffs. So we have to represent the people of our community, no matter who they are. And the politicians on both sides has to understand this. We are elected by the people just as they are in their communities. So we are the voice of the people, either Republican, Independent, or Democratic. And so we just have to have these conversations. We can have these panel discussions every day, but until we sit at the table in these closed door sessions and hash this out, and it takes more than one time. Visiting D.C. is an hour conversation. Come and visit my center, come and visit my city, and let's have these conversations without the cameras, without the press, and without the suit and tie. We have to get our hands dirty. Every politician make this image of rolling up their sleeves and giving a speech. Well, let's have these conversations one-on-one, and that's what we're looking for.
Well, so, I mean, well, how's it going? I mean, you said as you mentioned, as I mentioned, 43 years in law enforcement. You're affiliated with the Democrat Party, as a candidate, as a political office holder. And I mean, you're sort of, sounds like you're stipulating to my characterization of what has been going on, and you should, because it's accurate. But then what do you, How do you watch this play out? And well, we need to sit around the table and have a conversation. You're dealing with people that are saying essentially to you by what they actually do. Forget what they say. Watch what people do. What they actually do is say, well, I'll pay lip service to your face, but there are constituencies to me that are more important than law enforcement, and frankly, more important than the rule of law. And that's what big city prosecutors like Kim Foxx and Larry Krasner and many others have been saying, and that's what big city mayors and some national politicians have been literally saying, verbatim, like Kamala Harris.
Well, again, it takes conversation. It takes meeting and having a conversation. I've met with the Philadelphia DAs. I've met with these people, and we have to get away. And here's what I want to say. I was elected by the people in Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, North Carolina, and I can tell you this. My election was supported by both parties, both financially and by their vote. So it may be a little different because I'm going to be consistent, and I'm going to be consistent, and I will be more consistent to have these conversations and correct these wrongs.
Well, I'm not surprised because, pretty much everybody except the ideologues, except some of these professional agitators on the streets of Chicago, wants law enforcement to provide for public safety and to solve crimes when they're committed, to hold people accountable. That's what everybody wants. I mean, it's not so long ago, like 4 years ago, that black residents of Minnesota had to sue their own state to get equal protection as police protection as guaranteed under the Constitution. So I mean that's what's happening in Tim Walz's state and that Jacob Fry guy in Minneapolis, and that's what's happening. That's been happening for years, and it's happening right up until a couple of weeks ago in Ferguson. And if not for overwhelming police presence and professionalism right now in Chicago, it'd be happening here too. And So I get, why you've had this career in law enforcement, and I get why both sides or a lot of people on both sides would support you. I guess what I don't get is when at some point you say this person is, or this group of people are just professionally antagonistic towards us, politically antagonistic towards us. They're dangerous. They are negatively impacting our ability to do what we promised to do. And we're going to call them out and not sort of sit at the table and let them shine us on.
Well, we clearly understand that. Our position with the National Sheriff Association is to listen to our priorities. Whoever wants to do that, we're going to continue to protest our priorities in front of anyone's face. And that's what we have priorities. We're more than just the law enforcement inside our cities now, and that's why we're here talking. We are now becoming the mental health hospitals inside our cities. And so these are the things that we still need to talk about. We're always going to have the Republicans and the Democrat having what somebody says and somebody says here. And we all understand that. We understand that we all have differences about how law enforcement should be, how January 6th was, how Ferguson was. We're going to always have these discussions. But where we're at with the National Sheriff Association, listen to our priorities. We have to speak for both sides because they are all our people in our cities.
Well, what about...
And that's why we're going to be consistent.
Okay, what about Kamala Harris? I mean, you know that she has supported defunding police in the past and abolishing ICE. Why are you still supporting her?
I didn't say I supported her. I said we supported any president who is coming into office. We have to still have these conversations. We have to have the conversation with Donald Trump. We have to have these conversations with Kamala Harris. We just have to have the conversation with whoever will be the president.
What do you say to people, and I'm sure you hear this too, who, well, first of all, who want to go into law enforcement but are being persuaded not to by families who have a history of being in law enforcement? People just have an outside view. I mean, we hear this all the time on this show. I don't know who would want to be a Chicago cop. And you see this in some of the recruitment numbers and the difficulty getting people to join the police forces in various cities and various states. What do you say to people that see the police, whether they have a history in law enforcement in their family or they're just, citizen concerned about public safety in their community that see the police as like a thankless job that I wouldn't want to have any part of.
Well, that is why we have one of our 2025 priorities is retention. That's why we have retention as one of our priorities, because we all on either side sometimes bash the police, no matter what you said. This is why because I've been in this profession for 43 years. I've heard both sides. So this is why it's so important for us to talk to whoever is the president about our 2025 priorities, and one of them is retention. We need that help to retain our officers in this profession.
He is Garry McFadden. He is the sheriff of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department in town for the convention. He's currently serving his 43rd year in law enforcement. Sheriff McFadden, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. God bless you.
Thanks. You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
Do you have jewelry with sentimental value that needs repairing? Hi, it's Mike Gallagher. I'm a customer of family-owned Roland's Jewelers in downtown